It's a little ironic that our comedians have become more like journalists and our journalists are completely laughable. Like it never, obviously they're not comedians because they suck at it, but they're definitely laughable. And it's like, who are real journalists? Which brings me to, I was hoping we could talk about Julian Assange. I don't know if that's like, it's a very big thing for me.
Yeah.
And nobody is really talking about it in mainstream media, which obviously we know why.
Yeah.
And it's very scary. I mean, this is the extradition of him to me is the death of the First Amendment in this country.
Yeah. I mean, it's like those who speak the truth have been persecuted in our country for a long time, but this would be a definite new level. I mean, a journalist prosecuted under the Espionage Act, and he's not even American, and he's never operated from America, and we reserve the right to just grab anybody around the world
Yes.
that we that reveals the truth of our empire. I mean, it really is horrifying, and it really is a new level. And to go back to your last question about why are the comedians the journalists now,
Yeah.
in some some good examples, and I think it probably has to do with a lot of comedians have a tendency to want to speak their mind and want to say whatever they want to say and not be held back. Because stand-up comedy really is an art form that thrives on I can say whatever the hell I want, and that is one of the things we value in this country. Now, that doesn't mean they haven't tried to stop some comedians from doing it. I mean, Lenny Bruce was largely, he died of a drug overdose, but it was largely due to the fact that they had crushed his life and taken his ability to perform away sheerly and purely for the things he had said. He had
Content, all content.
All the content that upset people because it was going after religion and going after the country and the government and things like that. But yeah, so I think that stand-up comedy specifically has a long tradition of people really speaking the truth and not being held back. Whereas if you're talking about the mainstream media, at least, they don't get to that position unless they've learned to play the game, unless they've learned to say what fits with their corporate masters. And comedians won't generally do that, or most of them won't. But
Yeah. And then you look at people like Bill Maher and you think
there are exceptions.
and you think, oh, how far they have fallen.
Yeah. I mean, and the one that, Bill Maher has always come off as a bit of a charlatan and a bit of a snake oil salesman to me, but the one that really I find upsetting is John Oliver, because I used to know him, and I'm sure to this day he's one of the nicest guys. He's one of the funniest writers I've ever seen, and my interactions with him were always very nice. But I don't know whether he's told to say it or he's just dumb enough to read every Reuters article and think that's all the truth that can ever be had. But his segments, just feeding into the garbage propaganda against China, or against Venezuela, or against Jill Stein is really troublesome, to say the least.
He's still he still works for corporate America. He still works for that narrative. It's unfortunate. I think a lot of people were stunned when we first met the real Stephen Colbert, not Colbert from the Colbert Report, but the actual Stephen. And I think that it's a very similar thing. Like when we find somebody's comedy funny, we kind of necessarily assume, oh, they're cool, they're progressive. No, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Right. And I heard this actually isn't that long ago. This interview might have been a year ago or something, but Colbert was, he was asked about what people expected from him and things like that. And he said, me and John, meaning Jon Stewart, used to joke about how people just can't get it in their heads that we're not trying to create change. We're just making fun of stuff. We don't have a desire to become a player in shifting society. I feel like I learned that about those guys a while back, but Jon Stewart.
I was going to say, I can't believe he would speak for Jon Stewart, because Jon Stewart actually has been working pretty hard, doing all sorts of cool things post his time.
Yeah. Jon Stewart, I think, does want to create change, as we saw with the 9/11 responders bill, but it not on a grand enough level.
No.
I was talking about this with some journalist friends recently, and that, you know, the point that I think a lot of people got very disenchanted with what Jon Stewart and Colbert might achieve was the Rally for Sanity, where they brought 1 million people, mostly young people, out to the mall in
Yeah.
Washington D.C. And the final conclusion of the day was basically go home and be nice. Stop rocking the boat. Stop getting upset. Just go be nice to each other. And I was like, that is not going to create the change we need.
No, they're definitely not revolutionaries. They're not leading the charge. And it's unfortunate because those are people that have the biggest platforms that could be of use in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, it's unfortunate. And the other thing I wanted to ask you was about like where the journalists now? Like are there any? Where are the journalists?
I'd say that the ones I respect are alternative outlets that are not mainstream media, not funded by corporate America.
That's the
It's
key
places-
thing. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
Where are they funded? Exactly.
Yeah. It's places like The Gray Zone, Popular Resistance. You know, there are some other good ones, but I agree they are few and far between. Consortium News used to be Truthdig, but it's gone now. And so there are some places, but people have to hunt them down and find them. And they need to actually, I try and say this I've been doing daily YouTube videos. People need to not be lazy, and they need to go and search for this stuff, because the truth is my stuff that I'm posting is getting to very few people now, despite the fact that I have a massive Facebook following. They're not showing it to anyone. You know, I have a large YouTube following. They're not showing those to anyone. So it really comes down to whether people are going to be active and decide I need to go get this information. And unfortunately, like even wonderful people that have their head on straight, many of us are lazy at the end of the day. You know, oh, this has been popped up as the next thing to read. Well, then I'll just read that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I think that we have a lot more people that are misinformed more so than uninformed. And I think that that's what's really scary. And even well-intentioned people, they'll just get up, they'll put on their news, they'll put on their CNN, you know, they'll watch it. They think they're very informed, and they just get whatever the corporate talking points are. And it's sad because a lot of people, it's been gradual. Like I remember Rachel Maddow on Air America with Ed Schultz.
I listen to that all the time.
And so, you know, for somebody, let's say, who's been like watching her, it maybe it's happened gradually that you haven't noticed, you know, like I try to think of like how that happens, because it really is very black and white from where she used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I try and remember whether I was a little politically different there back then, but whether she was that much better or whether I was just that much wrong. And you know, whether I have continued to inform myself and, you know, read the important people and grow, and she has gone the other direction to full-time corporate America, just, you know, creating coups around the world, manufacturing consent for our endless bombing. I mean, it's kind of hilarious because I was in a bookstore and I picked it up because it seemed odd. She wrote a book in like 2012 called Drift, I think.
Yes, I read it.
You read it? And it was about how the military has like gone off the rails, and now she's the one manufacturing consent for those wars.
Yes, I did read that book, and it was about the complete military industrial complex and how our young people are basically being used as fodder for profit. That was essentially the concept of that book. Yes, I had forgotten about that. Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, how did she not see the difference between what she does on that show, getting paid $30,000 an episode, to manufacture consent for our wars, and what she wrote in that book?